economy away from oil and gas. One of the things that I realized at some point in time when I went into the Senate and I started studying the budget documents and so on is that when they are quoting figures, they actually quote certain aspects of the petrochemical sector as, you know, as services and classify it as like non-energy, you know, and then also our services sector is growing. It's all tied to energy at the end of the day. And that's the next thing about this massaging figures and moving things from here to there and whatnot. And I don't, you know, particularly think that the picture is really being painted to the public is an accurate one, because we really aren't doing enough to diversify the economy at this point in time. There's almost, I haven't seen any real reported wins when it comes to agriculture. And we know that the food is something that's affecting us. It's affecting us in terms of the forex shortage. So all of these things we have to deal with, because at the end of the day, look, like I keep saying, everything could come back to crime. You know, you put people to work in agriculture and develop really, you know, useful things for them to do, but make it in a way that it's profitable, because you don't want at the end of the day to tell people, well, go work in agriculture, but that job that you can offer to them in agriculture is a lot less, you know, profitable and attractive than picking a gun and robbing somebody. You understand? So it's like we have to do things to make people, I mean, of course, I'm not saying that it's the government's responsibility to deal with people and their morality. You know, people have to want these things for themselves, but we have to recognize sometimes that poverty breeds crime, and the lack of jobs, the lack of opportunities, sometimes educational opportunities and so on. People are just willing to go down that road of crime, and we have to stop it. We have to nip it in the bud, and we have to deal with the situation as it is right now. Law enforcement, I see the expenditure. I sit on the GSC for national security, and the kind of money that I am seeing and that I have seen invested in national security initiatives, I expect a lot better. And I just don't see why we're not seeing the results from those investments, and something has to be done about that.
I think your point on crime and agriculture, they actually come home with the example. I remember there was a young farmer, I can't remember if he was from Trinidad or Tobago. He was a young farmer. I think he was when hydroponics was now coming a bit more into the forefront in the local production industry. And I believe he was killed. And this is just an example where here's a young man looking to try to, you know, start something. Right, he's a young entrepreneur.
Yeah, correct, yeah.
Right, and the life of crime, it's not just those that want to be in crime, but also it could still come after you and say, no, you can't develop anything unless you give us a piece. There was another situation where a contractor, his mother told him, don't take the contract because the gangs wanted a piece of the contract, and he said, well, I'm not giving you a piece, and he killed him. So these things are very real.
And that's the other thing about it, that, look, I understand the logic behind, you know, the police saying, well, we don't want vigilante justice, we don't want everybody being armed, you can't arm, and this thing about firearms and legal firearms and giving people FULs and all of that. We are at a stage right now where people do not, and who vex, but people don't trust the police. People do not feel that they could depend on law enforcement to keep them safe. Business people in this country feel very under threat. And even I have spoken to a lot of farmers as well, who tell me, and the kind of stories I hear about what they have to deal with and how they want, and they are pleading with the government to basically, you know, allow them to protect themselves, because the state is failing to keep citizens safe. So if you want to get into your hydroponics business, which is amazing, and, you know, and I commend any young person who wants to do those things, I, as a parliamentarian, and if I were, you know, I would feel like it's my duty to create the environment to help you do that. And part of that environment is safety.
Well,
unit is failing our farmers.
I want to hopefully maybe pull the curtain back a little bit. So with this budget, I think the question is, you know, where do you compromise? Because a lot of members of the rescue said we want more expenditure on crime fighting, right? Of course, that's assuming the expenditure is effective, right? But we won't get into that. But they don't want no new taxes. And I could understand the request for both. And I'm not saying they're mutually exclusive, but then I'm saying we have to be prepared for a reduction somewhere. So with regards to the opposition now, do you all have to wait for the government's full presentation to be able to comment on things like that? Or do you have a sense already about, areas that could potentially be reduced in the short term?
Well, I mean, we would obviously look at expenditure from the previous year and what was budgeted, but we get the actual, what we call the budget books with the budgeted expenditure, what was released, what was expended, and so on. And we have a chance to examine that. And in the House, they have the Standing Finance Committee where they line by line drill down into those things. But, I don't know if you've watched it, if you've had the pleasure of observing that process. But, a lot of times questions asked, we are met with very, sarcasm and nonchalance by the government and so on. You want to talk about cutbacks? Tell me that you're going to cut back on the amount of money spent on a crime symposium on a CARICOM lime in the Hyatt, and you're going to put that money to the forensic science centers so people aren't waiting 6 months to get DNA results to bury their loved ones or to help identify a killer. That's what I want. As the average, I know it's not that simple in terms of governance and stuff like that, but as the average person on the street, I take off all hats that I wear. If I was just Jane Doe walking down the street and I have to pick up the newspaper today and hear that a crime symposium for 3 days in the Hyatt cost the state X millions of dollars, and at the same time when I flip the page I see that we don't have enough resources at the Forensic Science Center to help analyze DNA on time, or that we don't have enough CCTV cameras working to pick up when a young woman got into a taxi and then went missing. Those are the things that bother me, and at the end of the day we have to ask those questions. And people think that it's bacchanal when we talk about, well, they spend so much on this Hyatt conference. What has been the outcome of that crime symposium on crime in this country? Name one thing that you can pinpoint that came out of that particular symposium. I saw a photo in the newspaper and an article about the US is now pledging to help us with the gun issue that we have on. Okay, that's nice. What has actually materialized? How many guns have you taken off the street? How many guns have you seized in our ports? Do we have scanners working in the ports as yet? I don't even know they've purchased the scanners that have been down for 2 years or something or more. We have containers upon containers entering this country unchecked because they just randomly select and manually check containers for some time. That came out in a joint select committee.
Yes.
And that's where the guns coming from.
Yes.
That is where the guns coming from. And I don't need to spend 3 days in the Hyatt to tell you that. I didn't go Hyatt. Or I could tell you that. And you talk to any business person, anybody working in customs, anybody working on the port, and they will tell you that too. So you don't have to spend the money on Hyatt to tell you that.
I actually made it was ironic, it was a joke, but it wasn't a joke, that, well, the excuse for the borders not being the main source of guns and drugs is that, according to those in charge, it's mainly coming through the legal ports of entry, and to my mind, that's not right. But my point is, it was used almost as an excuse for the lack of patrols, and I'm just like, that's not really an excuse, that's just admitting a worse fault. But I want to wrap things up with a final question. So, first of all, at least one business chamber, the European chamber, they agree with you. The lack of a diversification is something that they're looking at and they're concerned with this. The lack of non-fossil fuel projects. So it could be an energy project, but the point is non-fossil fuel project in their mind. And I agree with you, agriculture is a big thing. Tourism is a potential earner for foreign exchange, which is what we need to look for. But the last thing that I'm worried about, and I really don't know how to prioritize this might be number 4, and maybe it should be number 1, because it goes back to what you said with crime and helping people have a livable wage. Education. I am very concerned about the education system in the country. And I feel as though it had the largest allocation last year, and yet they have bills that they cannot pay. AFCL is defunct. That's a whole fiasco. MTS might be running up a stack of bills. Who knows what the contractors are hoping for and how long they're waiting for money. That is the current set, not the AFCL ones, the MTS ones. And then on top of that, we have problems just in general with the education system. What do you think about that? Because I'm very unsure if I'm going to prioritize that over other things that we've spoken about today, but it's so important.
It is extremely important. And again, this is why I keep saying we have to look at all expenditure holistically. And I know people are going to say, like, look, crime is the major issue and they want to see the largest portion of the budget going into national security. And investments in education, and this is something that the opposition leader has said time and time again, and I fully endorse the statement from her. When you invest in education, you're dealing with crime in the future. That's exactly what it is. And so I would like to see, but again, not just an investment of money, but really a smart investment in making education more accessible to everyone. Dealing with, look, I understand coming out of COVID, you had people who just weren't being reached. What are we doing? How are we addressing the needs of all the people who just fell out of the system? It sounds bad when you say it, but listen, I believe in saying the truth and what I believe. And I believe that every child between, the ages of like 9 and 12 that basically fell off of the school, radar during COVID and had no access to online learning and all of that behind, they are potential people who can be, fall into a life of crime and fall by the wayside. They will suffer. They will have to, think every migrant child who is not in school right now and sitting on the road every day outside an ATM or a pharmacy or a gas station and begging with their mother and father, and they are here because we did not secure the ports, and because now we are giving them a card and hoping that somehow makes it look better that they have a card, but they are suffering. They are people who may potentially go down the road of a life of crime because they are suffering. So you have to invest in all of these areas in order to ensure that you're not just trying to solve the existing crime, but that you're not creating a situation that is ripe for crime to prosper.
Yeah.
And I mean, education, I think we need a big overhaul of our education system. I don't think the answer lies in destroying the Concordat. I think what we should be trying to do is look at the denominational schools that are performing better, both at the primary and secondary level, try to replicate it in the government schools, and bring some equality in terms of the quality of education that you can get. We need to improve, how we teach our curriculum. Is it suitable? We need to look at all of those things. Are we producing children who are just regurgitating information and learning how to pass exams, or are we creating critical thinkers? All of these things need to be done. That's what an education system is about. It's not just administering school and fixing school and awarding contract to your cabinet colleague, wife, company to make sure that they could fix the school in time for August, and then you award it as an emergency contract coming to the end of August so that they don't go through tendering processes. This is the kind of nonsense that we see happening whilst you have children not having access to education. There are schools in this country that were built under the People's Partnership Administration and are 90% or more complete, which have not been opened. 8 years later, we have schools that aren't accessible because the roads are collapsing due to landslides. Imagine when you actually have a physical school where children can go to school and learn, and they can't get to it, and they don't have access to proper facilities because the road is collapsing. I mean, that says a lot about what we are thinking. I mean, where our priorities are when it comes to education.
Well, so, Senator, I don't want to keep you any longer. We are technically over time. You have another engagement, so let me take this opportunity to remind you of that before you get rolling again. Yeah. But thank you so much for taking your time out this morning, even though you're so busy today. And it's some good points that you're making, and I think the key point is coming out of that, not necessarily a bigger budget, but we need a smarter budget. And I think
smarter budget and a smarter administration of the budget.
That's what we need to start thinking, start asking for. All right, Senator. So thanks very much, folks. We're going to take a break. Oh, sorry about that. Folks, we're going to take a break. And when we return, we will have the rest of the show there. We'll go with the daily review. Well, not necessarily as normal, but as we're accustomed to. Stay tuned to Talking Point here on WESN, your content capital, broadcasting in HD. Only station in English.
You gave us the inspiration to be first. We gave you the solutions that put you first. You walked with us side by side, and we continued to serve you with pride. First Citizens celebrates with you 30 years of achieving dreams, shaping success stories, and painting brighter futures together. And together, we'll accomplish so much more. First Citizens, together, 30 and beyond.
Let the home store turn your house into a home you love. Get everything you need to give your home that special look and feel. We offer household items, lawn and garden, paint center, hardware, plumbing, lighting and electrical, toys and storage solutions. 5 convenient locations: 6th Avenue Barataria, The Falls at West Mall, Pennywise Plaza Shoguanas, C3 Center Branch and C3 San Fernando. Check out our Facebook page for more information and come visit us today. The Home Store. Turn your house into a home you love. FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
I am Rondell Donowa, attorney at law and host of Strictly Legal on WESN Content Capital. Strictly Legal is a legal program geared towards informing you, the public, of your legal rights, responsibilities, and remedies. So be viewing Thursdays 10 a.m. to 10:30 a.m.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, the Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity, from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378, or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com. Welcome back to Talk About, ladies and gentlemen. And I just had the Opposition Senator Jayanti Lakshmi-Dayal. We were speaking about the budget. It's going to be a tricky situation from my perspective. I don't necessarily do deep dives into the numbers with regards to the budget, with regards to the figures, with the balance sheets, etc., to say it in very simple terms. But I am thinking any sort of plan, yes, you need to identify areas of need or problem areas or issues, but then what turns a list of issues into a plan is how do you prioritize? What do you prioritize? Each item. What needs to go first? What needs to get the most amount of money? What needs to go second? What could wait? And we have so many needs. I don't know if there's a good answer, and I definitely believe that there is not enough money. And that's more or less what the conversation was: crime, the economy with regards to sustainable development, education. And there are a lot of small areas in terms of the national budget, but big areas in terms of when you think about the money, relatively speaking, like the fire service, like the EFCL creditors, like the $1 billion owed to TNTech. And I do wonder to some extent with regards to education in particular and how bad it is. And then also, there should not be a difference between, the senator was saying to try to look at the denominational schools that are performing better and try to replicate that. To some extent, I do wonder if it is based on the expectations of everybody involved. When you go to a denominational school, you're expected to do better. You're expected to have good grades. You're expected to be smart. You're expected to do this, to do that. The teachers have high expectations of you and themselves. Your parents have high expectations of you and the school, and will put effort into it, will participate in fundraising and the PT and so forth. And I wonder to some extent, with regards to other schools that are looked down upon, if the expectations of the population is just too low. You don't expect much from them, so why bother? Why bother to do all these extra things? Why bother to put all this extra effort? I and a little junior sec, why should I bother? I mean, I know people who it didn't stop them, right? And our history is littered with examples which we probably don't highlight enough to show our young boys and girls, this is not the end of the world. And that goes back to the talk about the SCA and that whole process, but regardless of what we have there to test students, to determine their placement, etc., regardless of that, we will always have this problem because there will be some schools better than others until we figure this out. But I do think in TNT, we have a problem with low expectations. Low expectations for service, low expectations for productivity, low expectations for in a lot of ways. And it could be we're a small island, we don't have the pressure to compete because there are not a lot of competitors in certain fields. There are not a lot of competitors, so you become complacent. And now that we have the internet and the diaspora is, you know, obviously it's ever growing because our local population doesn't grow by that much. There's more experience about the wider world, about a wider scope, and we see other places where the individuals have higher expectations, but somehow we can't translate that down here. And is our culture too ingrained? And then we have all of these problems. More on that later on when we get into some of the middle topics, but let's move on now. I want to start off this morning's daily review. And I want to start off with something that is both good news, but not necessarily that great of a news. And that is, now, again, I don't necessarily know all the details, so I don't know how good the news is. There was a drug trafficking bust locally where an individual locally was arrested and $1 million US, so 6 million TT, of heroin and cocaine bound for the US was seized. I assume this might be pure product, which means that, you know, anybody who watch a crime show or a cop show, you cut it with whatever chemical to make more money on the street, blah, 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 blah. So this might be the transition, because it was bound for the US. Now, apparently, this is due to DEA agents all the way in the US, Philadelphia, from 2020, working on this case to get this result, to impact a drug smuggling operation. So on one hand, well, they finally got somebody, right? This is not a marijuana interdiction. Unless the cocaine washes up on the shore these last couple of months, that's the only, well, yeah. The other time, they got a truck full of marijuana. They might get up some marijuana in a pirogue, some marijuana here, some marijuana there. Some cocaine wash up on the shore. They got it by accident. This was actual interdiction. This was working with our foreign partners. Somebody was arrested. It doesn't necessarily say how high up the food chain this person is. His identity and suspected background or whatever has not, I don't think, been, wait, hold on, sorry, yes. Mr. Sherlan Guppy, but it doesn't say, you know, how high up. He's accused of trafficking the cocaine and heroin, and he is expected to be extradited to the US to be charged in the US, which I actually don't have a problem with because our court system is so slow. I don't know if we would see effective justice rendered that way. If drug traffickers have now the threat of being sent to the US courts, you're not in local remand, you're not in the local prisons, you're going to the US, you ain't going to stay there for 10 years, and then the case kind of get forgotten about, 15 years, and then maybe you might be able to get out because the case can't proceed. Or, at worst, well, the case does proceed, but you're already in there for 10 to 15 years. So, you know, the amount of time you have left on your sentence, that's a big chunk of it gone already. Meanwhile, things not that bad. Remember, we saw a video of a fet in the prison, relatively speaking. But the point that I want to make is, I don't necessarily see anything, and maybe, of course, this could be because it's a U.S. Embassy has a lot to say about it. The local TNT organized crime unit apparently was involved. It doesn't say to what extent. So the question, of course, is, okay, the foreign collaboration, well, this is done before a lot of the local, the current or recent talk about crime. So this collaboration is working. Cool. But to what extent now can this be considered something that could grow? Because we can't ship all of our cases to the US. We can't ship all of our criminals to the US. We can't just say, well, extradite everybody. So to the big crimes, to the drugs coming through the transshipment point, to the guns coming through the transshipment point, we could get the US's help, and that could have some spillover effects. But we have to wait and see, you know, what that actually means. This is the first big win, but I don't know, you know, how much do we contribute to this win, because we need that capacity to deal with the domestic crimes that we ain't gonna get the foreign collaboration help with. Call me a pessimist, but it is what it is. I need real results. Little wins here and there, we've had that for the last few years, right? Some people might say, well, why are you being so hard? No. This is supposed to be an elite transnational organized crime unit. Okay, what about the elite local organized crime unit? What about an elite anti-gang unit? What about an elite homicide investigations unit? Domestic crime is still up to us. So the collaboration is good, but I hope it doesn't turn into, well, we just kind of depend on bigger brother to deal with it. Meanwhile, we have no capacity, or we have not further developed our local crime fighting skills. I need the detection rate on murders to be at I don't know, 50%? Is that reasonable? 40%? Whatever, something higher than it was last year. All right, let's move on to the next topic there. Something not quite so, well, technically that shouldn't have been a depressing topic, was it? It was technically a set of good news. Some more good news for Tobago, at least, specifically. The president of Trinidad and Tobago has delivered her address in the THA, and she has called for more efforts to be made to get autonomy for Tobago done. Autonomy is one of the items that's going to be up for debate and further consideration in Parliament. My thing is, that's all well and good. I still would like to know exactly what it is what are the details of autonomy? Because there's a world where Parliament passes an autonomy bill and Tobago hates it. Right? Now, it might be effective, and it might be what Tobago needs as opposed to of what it wants. On the other hand, it might be completely rubbish and something that is a non-starter, kind of like what a lot of people think procurement legislation is. Watered down, doesn't really do anything, and it doesn't change much of the status quo. Because it's a tricky situation, right? They do have, I think, a few examples. Of course, Scotland has its own assembly, etc., etc. But it's a tricky situation because you still have a national government that has to have the capacity to do national projects. So to what extent do you put responsibilities onto the local legislature? Now, one Reginald Dumas, he was surprised by the president's support for autonomy. That's the headline, that's the title of one of the local newspaper stories. But he pointed out to the same thing. He said, what is it that they're actually debating? He's not sure. His thing, the one detail that he wants to see is the capacity to make laws. And to some extent, I could see that because every now and then there seems to be things in the law that it might work for Trinidad, it doesn't quite work for Tobago. Now, one could argue, well, the country is not that big, and you can make similar arguments for other parts of Trinidad, more remote parts of Trinidad. Maybe not so much, but Tobago does have some very specific, well, one specific obstacle, and that is I can't just I can't travel overland to central offices in Trinidad. I have to take a ferry or a plane. And that just makes everything a lot more complex. Yes, it's difficult for someone from the extremities of Trinidad to travel to Port of Spain if they need to do something in Port of Spain. But it's still, to some extent, a little bit simpler than having to take a plane to Piarco or a ferry to Port of Spain in various ways. So, I myself, I want to know with regards to the financial side. First of all, we have property tax on the horizon. Property tax is for local government. The THA is a form of local government technically, because that is the executive model that the THA has, is what is supposedly, Robinson apparently said this when he instituted the THA. The PNM is looking to do this with their local government reform. That is the model for the local government executives. So a part of me wants to know, does the law that includes property tax include the THA? Because obviously the local government reform is not going to include the THA. That structure is not actually changing, right? Or is it not? And then, you know, what are the other budgetary considerations with regards to the island? Of course, the relationship between Parliament and the THA, I think that's going to be a sticking point, ultimately. Even if they're allowed to pass local laws, which at least on the surface, I don't have an issue with. And there might be some unforeseen circumstances or issues that come forth. I haven't seen any yet or figured them out yet. But still, that relationship seems to be a lot of the issues politically, especially when potentially the government in Parliament could be the opposition in the THA. And that political dynamic, it started off okay at first, but it seems as though we don't necessarily have the maturity in our political environment to deal with that. So all these things are on the horizon. Does it necessarily mean life is going to be better for Tobagonians? I don't know. Most likely, and this is the pessimist in me, Tobago could get its autonomy, and life in Tobago is not necessarily going to be better. It'll just shift the problems to somewhere else. Now, speaking about that, I said we'll get back to this in the middle. The Chief Secretary wants better service in Tobago, and he's calling this on two fronts. One of them is with regards to customer service. He pointed out to boat tours, glass-bottom boat tours to Boca Reef. But I think it's safe to say that one of the issues Tobago has, as tourism has never been a necessity, especially since the THA, you know, for the last 20 years, was the chief employer of the island, the main employer of the island. Why do I need to work in a hotel and have to treat guests courteously? And I have had to interact with some mostly local hotel guests that really, it takes the phrase, the customer is always right, and it shatters it to pieces completely. And when you've worked in that type of job, you understand to some extent the reasons why people that work in customer-facing jobs at times are not the best. They don't have the personality to deal with the nonsense and not retaliate, because you can't. It doesn't matter what the customer does, you can't do that. And I think culturally, that's an issue we have widespread on the island. Now, to the current administration, in TH's credit, their continual program started by the PNM. I just want to get it here. With some consultants with regards to customer service improvements on the island. And that's a good sign, because I've also heard a lot of complaints about that. There are a lot of people who take it for granted. But I do wonder to what extent, again, we have low expectations of ourselves, of our ability, of our capacity. But also, the customers have low expectations of our local businesses as well. We have local businesses whose standards might actually be better than, or prices are better than, the deals are better than what they might get in other places. But when they go to other places, they're courteous. They're almost afraid to speak out, right? They don't want to upset the boat. But when they're within our borders, oh gosh, it's a bacchanal. I want to complain about how we always so subpar. Meanwhile, I'll say this, there are a lot, what few foreigners we do have, they come here and they appreciate what we have and they enjoy what we have, and for the most part, they don't give us trouble. Some do. So I can understand the chief sec's call, but I do think it's a cultural thing throughout the country. It's with regards to our expectations for each other, whether we are the customer or the one servicing the customer. The other thing that the chief sec wants to care about servicing the country is with regards to not repeating what happened with the airport, how the lands were taken back to construct the new airport, which the irony is he has an issue with that, but he's all for the airport. I have an issue with the airport. I'm 50-50 on that, because I am more than ready to be stand corrected. But I don't think those people should have been allowed to build there in the first place. Now, I somewhat disagree with the fact that because someone in the bureaucracy of government did not do their job for whatever reason, they now technically have to suffer, because their lives start from scratch to some extent, right? With regards to businesses, with regards to homes, could be guest houses, etc., etc. Some people, you know, they reestablish themselves fine. TK's hardware looks even better than it was. However, rest in peace, Mr. TK. But the THA, they're looking to try to facilitate this specific process with regards to helping people get back on their feet and reestablishing their homes. But he has a point. But I do wonder if, you know, the root cause of the problem, not everybody doing their job and doing the right thing. So it's not just the government's fault. It might be government's fault for how it was handled. It might be government's fault for how the people were treated. But at the end of the day, if that was airport land, things should have been put in place. No one, I believe, is going to get punished for that. And it will happen again. It will happen again where there will be some project somewhere in the country and people will be displaced and people will be upset about it. Now, whether they took the money and tried to stay there and protest or whatever, I'm not going to get into all that. At some point, I don't actually know what happened firsthand. But let this be a warning to people throughout the rest of Trinidad. I think Tobago maybe got a little bit of a warning. Hopefully they keep that in mind next time a similar situation happens. I think the rest of us need to be cognizant of this as well. Be careful, you could be squatting one day and the government say we need to put our industrial park here, you gotta move. And then what? Because they ain't gonna, probably not gonna set you up in a mansion, so where you gonna move to? All right, let's take a break. I don't want to go on too long with just you listening to me talk, but let's take a break. When we come back, there are a couple more topics I want to finish with. Topics of concern with regards to, well, it's a little bit more than just negligence. Potentially, I think. Stay tuned to Talking Point on WSN. We'll be right back.
Maybe he landed here totally by coincidence. But if by chance he's admiring your fresh coat of Benjamin Moore soft sky blue, well, that's a pretty high compliment. Coming from an expert.
From Maracas Bay to Arafita Avenue and Piaco, Richard's Bake and Shark brings the world's most popular fish sandwich closer to you. Open daily at all our locations.
Congratulations to the Nicole Larson Live Show, which received a special mention in the Best Magazine Program category at the CBU Caribbean Media Awards in August 2023.
On the next episode of Nicole Larson Live, living in victory every day. If you have a choice to go back and be the 18-year-old,
Nope.
But for most of us, June, we wish we had youth again, at least a little 20 years or 10 years, and you are saying, no, right where I am, this is who I want to be. You ain't going back. You don't want to go back at all. Why?
No. I don't want to be 18. I don't want to be 35. I don't want to be 50. I love being me because I see the maturity in me that I will look back at and say, you really did that? Like, really? That's the best you could have done?
Seriously?
Reduce your expenses. You must find a way to cut back on your expenses. Okay, if it means writing down your monthly expenses, you have to do that. And you need to be able to see which ones you need to cut off.
An encore of Nicole Larson Live, living in victory every day. Every Sunday at 8 p.m. and Wednesday at 4:30 p.m. on WESN.
My name is Carl Media. I'm the founder and the host of Ever Increasing Voice Ministries. Join me every Saturday and Sunday on WESN, this powerful station, at 9 a.m. on Saturdays, 1 p.m. and 7 p.m. nightly. Also on Sundays, I'll be on at 7 a.m., 1 p.m. and 7 p.m. at night time. When you come here, we are getting people heavenly ready.
Welcome back to Talk About, ladies and gentlemen. And I said before the break, I had two stories here about something that bothered me. I don't know if we'll have time to get into them, but when I describe them, you'll understand. The first story, a security guard, he was fired, he was accused of theft, and he was, charged, arrested, taken to trial, and, he got eventually $200,000 for malicious prosecution. The state was also ordered to pay $40,537 in costs for the defendant, as well as interest on the general, special, and exemplary damages. I don't know how much that will work out to. This is because the judge held that the police officer who charged him did not have any reason other than coerced confessions to charge one, Mr. Dexter Galtio. I probably mispronounced your name. Forgive me, sir. With larceny. Apparently his house was searched, they did not find any of the items. More importantly, he was recorded to be on duty at another location at the time of the theft. Additionally, based on this clear absence of reasonable and probable cause, as well as the evidence of fabricated confession statements, the court finds that the prosecution was actuated by malice. The incidents took place allegedly in 2012 and 2013. The charges were dismissed and he sued the state. He provided the alibi at his trial. He maintained his innocence. The state prosecutors tried to insist that the officers had reasonable probable cause, but he said he was threatened to sign those confession documents. And the judge said the evidence did not prove there was reason to charge the accused other than two coerced confessions. Thus, the court accepts as more credible that someone else fabricated the second statement, as was the case with the first one. And I guess this is the key point here that I want to highlight. Glaring red flags that make it unlikely that the claimant would sign a second statement that differs materially from the first one just a few hours later. Red flags. This is one anecdotal case example, and we don't have necessarily all the details. But the implications, in my opinion, are frightening. Because here is a man that apparently, he was on duty somewhere else. He wasn't even at the location in question. and somebody decided to pin the charges on him. Don't necessarily know exactly why. Don't know who decided to tell the police he's the guilty guy, and why did the police run with this theory, however they got it, that he was the guilty one. Now I get it, a lot of times in crime, when you actually look at real life investigations as seen on TV, because I'm not an investigator, or even when you look at, so not TV shows, but documentaries on real life crime, or even when you read up on crimes that happen around the world, quite often the most obvious answer is the answer. But our system of justice is not, innocent until obviously guilty, or most likely guilty, or what seems to be the most likely guilty person. It's innocent until proven guilty. We have that for a reason. So now the state has to pay for damages, but more importantly, I'm not even too upset about the fact that, here goes another $200,000 because somebody screwed up one way or the other, right? Either they messed up the trial or they messed up the investigation. And it seems as though the investigation was messed up, but not as a mistake. Not as a mistake. The irony of this is that here we have a situation where something goes to trial. We're not talking about cocaine and murder. We're talking about 9 batteries and a radio. But this pushes the trial with signed confessions, 9 batteries and a radio. And you can't even treat this properly. Like, I don't understand. If this was a known gangster involved in a murder and you do something underhanded, at least I could understand that. I won't agree with it. But you kind of do some foolishness here over 9 batteries and a radio. That's all it takes for a police officer to potentially either act unethically, willfully, or the alternative scenario in my mind, in my opinion, is that he is so unskilled in investigations, he didn't know what he was doing, he didn't realize what he was doing was wrong. So we either have willful, unethical behavior or foolish ignorance. I don't know which one would be more frightening. If I had to deal with a police officer, either from the perspective as a victim's family member or of being a victim who wants to see justice in something that was either done to me or done wrong against somebody close to me, or if I'm falsely accused of something and I'm relying on the system, because that's ideally what you do. You trust the system. And in this case, thankfully, the backstop of the judge worked out. The system works for him. Sometimes it takes a while, right? You have to go through all of these things. It might harm your reputation. It might harm your ability to get a job, which is why you have damages so high. But it doesn't always work that you trust the system. I have heard of stories where judges could act in very unfair manners in various types of cases. Although what cases are reported to be fair to the judiciary, we consistently get results like this. It's one thing that gives me hope in our society, to be honest. That at some point somebody with a reasonable head on their shoulders is going to actually bring reasonable logic to a situation and untangle the mess that so many people want to just force upon us. Because that's the implications of this. The officers in charge of this case, either they wanted to push this case through for whatever reason, I don't know, in an unethical manner, or they had no idea how to conduct investigations. And if I was in this gentleman's position, I don't know what to think or how I would feel. And this should be something that concerns everybody as well, because not only could this now infringe upon your rights, but there's also now could be an issue or this probably is a very big issue with regards to our criminal justice system. Because if our investigations are so unreliable, why are we surprised that the detection rate for murders is so low? 600 and they got 75, give or take, 612. 75 out of 612. So, don't have time for the other story, but I just wanted to point this out. A gold star for the judge in this case and for judges in cases like this that we hear about anyway, but a lot of bad questions for the investigators of this case and the prosecutors in this case, because, come on. And maybe there's more to the story. If you know, call and let me know after the news break, but we break right now for news on the hour here on WESN. Stay tuned, Talking Point. We'll be right back after this.
This is WESN's News. Thank you for joining us. Here are the headlines. President Kangaloo calls for national focus on Tobago's autonomy. Fun Splash Water Park owner highlights limitations of lifeguards in tragic drowning incident. A 33-year-old man is held with a homemade shotgun in Mayaro. And in international news, mutilated remains of up to a dozen people are dumped in Mexico's business city. With the details, I'm Keaton Shaw. The President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, Her Excellency Christine Carla Kangaloo, addressed the Assembly at the Assembly Legislature in Scarborough. Prior to her address, the President received THA's Chief Secretary, Farley Augustine, at the villas at Stonehaven. She expressed, in this pivotal moment in our nation's history, it becomes imperative to place Tobago's autonomy at the forefront of our national agenda. Her Excellency said she is of the firm belief that the country must now engage in a comprehensive re-evaluation of the issue of Tobago's autonomy. She affirmed, going on to state that she perceives this as the opportune time for a definitive legislative effort aimed at granting autonomy to Tobago. Vijay Ramai, owner of Fun Splash Water Park, commented that having lifeguards doesn't always guarantee saving lives in emergencies. This statement comes in the wake of the tragic drowning of a 5-year-old Damari Jeffrey at the water park on Sunday. Ramayo pointed out that even at locations with lifeguards on duty, unfortunate incidents have occurred. In contrast, Damari's family expressed the belief that if lifeguards had been present at the water park, his life might have been spared. In a news report, Ramay clarified, saying the water park has signs posted around its pool areas explicitly stating the absence of lifeguards. He said they don't have lifeguards, they have pool attendants. Damari drowned during a birthday celebration for his 2-year-old cousin, Shemaiah Gooding. A 33-year-old man who was allegedly held on Tuesday morning with a homemade shotgun and 1 round of ammunition is currently being questioned by police. The suspect, an unemployed man from Newlands Village, Guayaguayari in Mayaro, was held by officers attached to the Mayaro Criminal Investigations Department and Task Force, led by Acting Sergeant Mohammed, during a firearm eradication exercise. During the period between 9 a.m. and 12:30 p.m. on September 26th, police officers executed the exercise at a garden camp in Newlands Village, Guayaguayari, where they allegedly found a homemade shotgun and 1 round of 12-gauge cartridge. The lone occupant was not authorized to have the weapons in his possession. He is facing possession of firearm and possession of ammunition charges. In international news, the mutilated remains of up to a dozen people were found strewn across the northern Mexican city of Monterrey on Tuesday. Messages left with the remains suggest the victims were killed as part of a purge within a gang. Monterrey is the industrial and business capital of Mexico and the seat of many large companies. The discovery of the dismembered bodies at 7 separate sites across Monterrey came after a drop in the level of violence in recent years. Local media said that next to the remains found were signs referring to attempts to infiltrate a cartel. That's WESN's news. Thanks for joining us. I'm Keishan Shah. Join us again at the top of the hour.
We exposed 5 strangers to KFC's delicious chicken to see if any time could be KFC time. And at the first bite, the party began. We repeated the experiment during the day, during business hours, on weekends, with sunshine, with rain. And it's confirmed. KFC's flavor makes anytime KFC time. KFC, it's finger licking good.
Welcome back to Talking About, ladies and gentlemen. A lot to speak about. We had the senator at the top of the show, at the start of the show this morning. Not the usual, but it's a busy time for the senators, so she was with us. We were speaking about the budget and, of course, the various areas of need. I think it's going to be a hell of a task to properly prioritize what our needs are, where to allocate the money, and we'll see how it goes on Monday. Now, more about the show maybe later, but first we have our first caller from Diego Martin. Good morning, caller. You're on the air.
Hi, Sean. Good morning.
Morning.
Thank you. Sean, you are correct about the farmer. I remember he was a young guy, only 19.
Yes.
He went to collect money that was owed to him, and he was ambushed. He was a great inspiration, but look, he couldn't live his dream.
Yes.
And in this country, there are myriad of reasons for this. Even with the entrepreneurship programs, when you've finished with that, it's hell to access funding, even for things as obvious as agriculture. So you can forget innovation because, again, I live with an industrial designer who tells me every single day, but we do not make anything in this country. What do you want me to design? A spaceship? For real creatives, they also need to first explain what they do, because we are so far behind with other progressive countries that people in government don't even understand new things. You say behavior change as one example. It's foreign. And lastly, I agree with much of what Jayanti said. I only saw part, especially with school, because I saw a little boy crying 2 weeks ago because he couldn't go to school. So a myriad of reasons to not live one's dream in this country. Thanks, bye.
Thank you, caller. Yes. We don't understand new things. I like that point, because I'll say this. I appreciate the statements about digitization and digital transformation, and we have that in the education sector, in the various bureaucratic arms of the government, hopefully in the police service. They've started, but there's some serious growing pains with that in the police service. I don't necessarily want to say what they are, because there's some things I don't necessarily want to reveal to the public unnecessarily, but we don't understand new things. And I see that most especially when you hear the leaders of the nation speak about new technologies in the manner that they're reading a speech someone else wrote. And the thing about journalism, I don't consider myself a journalist, but I do consider myself a commentator, something of an audio-visual columnist per se. And there's overlap in the two fields in the sense that, look, what we're going to talk about might take us into a lot of different areas that are very technical, that have their own language, that have their own ways of understanding. And in order to be able to speak about them in ways that for other people to understand, we do have to understand it to some degree. You don't have to understand rocket science like a rocket scientist, but you do have to understand the issues and be able to then identify where it matters to us, the general population. And I don't really get the sense that our leaders always understand the things that they're talking about. And sometimes it's in how they cherry pick, and sometimes it's when it feels as though they're just reading words, buzzwords. They don't even necessarily understand what the buzzwords mean. We have a call on the line from San Fernando. Good morning. You're on the air.
Good morning, Sean.
Morning, morning.
I want to highlight two things this morning. One that you didn't speak about. This issue of the deficit in the NIB, shortfall at 1.2 billion that they spoke about.
Yes.
And my issue is that that has been brought about in the NIB because of mismanagement of the funds of the NIB by the state. That is one. And the inability of the state to come up with, what should I say, to reinvent the pension schemes in Trinidad and Tobago, the national pension schemes. Because the state has a pension scheme where they call it grant, it's a grant, but it's a pension.
Yes.
And that is given to people regardless. Most of those people have not contributed, but they get a pension. And I don't know why the state cannot come up with a plan where people who may not necessarily be in the system to pay NIS can contribute to a national pension scheme which they will reap the benefits of in the end. I can't understand that. And now, I think there's an audit is needed of the NIB and an independent audit on the findings made public for us to see, because now to ask people who might be 59, 58 to know, because one of the things that may be coming in the budget, as people are saying, maybe the increase of the retirement age to 65, and so we'll have to wait and see. But the NIB needs, the state needs to take responsibility and come up and reinvigorate the NIB, come up with new schemes. Now, the other thing is that Tobago issue with the president and the commentary.
Yeah.
Tobago, economy needs to come before autonomy in Tobago. And when I say economy, the Tobago House of Assembly has all these, what you call them, all these divisions, and they pack them with people. That is why they respond. That's why they employ 67% based on what Ronald James said in his last review.
Right.
67% of the working class in Tobago are employed by the THA. And I heard the chief secretary say 28% of their staff has tertiary level education. And why can't the Tobago House Assembly build capacity? Okay, the state, they're talking about coming out to Trinidad to get stuff done where you can't get up there. Force the state's hand. Say, I have X amount of staff. Lessen the staff in the THA and put some of that staff towards building institutional capacity at the state level. So a lot of some of the things that you need to come to Trinidad for, you do have to come to Trinidad for. But put something on the table. Right? My point is, put something on the table, not just complain. And that issue you talked about, service, right, lastly, service is not unique to Tobago. There is bad service wherever you go, whatever part of the world you go. I think it is especially bad in the service sector in Tobago. I have seen it in varying areas. In there are good. There's some good service, but the chief secretary is right. They need to step up the game. This is all part of your tourism product, and it doesn't matter what part of the world you are. If you're in Barbados, if you're in Indonesia, if you're in Guam, you have to step up your service.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching.
Thank you, caller. Yes, that last point is very important, especially because we're at the end of the line. It's just a little bit more expensive to get it. And on top of that, because we don't have its economies of scales, we don't have, in some respects, the same number of people coming in. So the flights that are coming to here aren't always going to be cheap, right? Now, St. Lucia to Trinidad, I think, is cheap. But for European tourists, they have to still go to St. Lucia. That's not cheap. That leg of the flight is not going to be cheap for them. So, you might as well just stay in St. Lucia, where things are a bit more professional, despite the fact that Tobago potentially has more going on for it, more good points for it, for tourists, than St. Lucia. But St. Lucia has one thing that Tobago doesn't have, and that is a mature tourism industry. We have a call on the line?
Yeah, good morning, sir.
Morning, morning.
All right, listen to this. Two quick points, right? One, the NIB.
Yeah.
The NIB have been mandated by law that they deduct these things from people, make people pay for it. If you don't pay, have a charge. Now, the companies who were supposed to follow the law, initially they were taking the money and putting stamps on a card. If you remember, they were paying with a card.
Right.
All those stamps have been stolen by the same employees when they are proof. So now, when the people over the years now reach retirement age and they're looking for the contribution, they can't find it. And that happens a lot, I'm telling you. The next thing is that, and there's a way, somewhere where the last government, the one before that, changed the pension from 1,800 to 3,000 a month. They did that, but they didn't put it in the law. And what happened? When you make a claim now, and I asked them, hey, here what happened, you're really supposed to get 1,800, but because the government say to pay all 3,000, we pay all the 3,000, but it had no standing that we must do that. No. So when you pay a contribution, and that's fellows like me, who pay over 1,500 contributions, I'm talking about twice the amount of 750. And you would expect that you will get some kind of rebate for that. You know what I say? For every 100 contribution you make, you will get $25. Now, that is not how you run business in Nepal. You understand? I work for a company for 6 years, and that company, I'm telling you, must provide a VAT certificate before they get government contracts. And they have been doing big, huge government contracts for years. So how the bloody hell they could get a VAT certificate and not pay the NIS? I mean, this is both sides. Right now, they're not paying monthly again because they have a long line to go and pay. They have a penalty. No, they give them access, but lie. Whenever they want to pay, they pay now. Or they pay 3 months or a year. That's what they do. So by that time, everybody done that and they can't get a claim. The money you invest in that Apsara nonsense up there, right, for $27 million. You're going to sell it for $21 million. So it's real money you always spend. And Mr. Farley in Tobago want to get autonomy. Them guys. But you know what? They will get no subvention from the government for this, for anything at all. They all pay all their own way. But you know the upshot of that is, they're going to claim all the oil rights on the East Coast because it lies in our territorial waters. We want the oil. So think about what I just said, alright? And see where, because nobody is talking about it and I think in the right way. We know that you take people's money and go invest it and get that. Sometimes you might lose. But they had the monopoly because they were collecting money. And I mean, if it's because you have to pay a little increase, do it. But you're not doing that. Politically, you feel it's correct. Everybody will, they want to increase. You find it very odd. And because somebody raised an issue that they should give them for that oil increase, all of a sudden now you're seeing the papers front page, and I be losing money.
Yeah.
That they have my mistake. So they
Well,
say, hey, don't look for nothing, right? And I'm going to detail all the other bad spending, but take that one on and you have a nice day, all right?
Thank you, caller. Now, to be fair with your last statement, the situation with the NIB is not new to the news sphere, to the national conversation via our media outlets. However, yes, sometimes you do question the timing of these things when more information is released. Here's the thing, though. I hear what both you and a previous caller said. The thing is, because the caller from San Fran, he'd say, reinvent the pension schemes. Politically, people want freeness. People are accustomed to freeness. We might no longer be able to afford freeness, but that's what the population in general wants, right? The base of the voters, of the voting support of the political parties. And cutting that is unpopular. Cutting anything is unpopular. I mean, there's a little bit of credit given to this government for doing things like limiting the fuel subsidy. A little bit of credit. They didn't do it because they said, oh, this is the best thing and we're all, all for long-term thinking. They did it because in the short run they had to do it. Usually, governments of Trinidad and Tobago across the board will pay in the short run. They will give things out for short-term gain and not consider true long-term considerations, true long-term implications. We have another call on the line. Good morning. Morning, caller.
Hello, good morning. Good morning to you, sir.
Morning, morning.
Yeah, I'm calling from Tunapuna. I want to touch on the NIS.
Yes.
And give you the main reason why there's this shortfall in the NIS. In the year 2016, when the new government went into operation, power, Imbert and Dr. Rowley, they met 516,926 people paying contributions. 3 years after that, before the COVID, that figure of 516,000 reached to 402,000. As a matter of fact, 516,000 were paying. 3 years after, 402,000 were being able to pay because 120,000 people had lost their jobs in that first 3 years before COVID. And that is where the shortfall comes. So now they have to ask people to pay 5 years to get paid 5 years later. In other words, they are stealing from each NIS pensioner $180,000 to make up for the mismanagement. They are stealing from each NIS pensioner when they raise that 60 to 65, $180,000 to make equal the mismanagement of the NIS. This is what has happened. Let Mr. Imbert and Rowley explain how that happened. In that 3 years, 120,000 people couldn't have paid NIS because they lose their job. Let them explain that. And that is where the downfall started.
Thank you, caller.
Get this information from NIS itself.
Yes, yes. Because even in the report for the shortfall, they more or less pointed to the fact that contributions dropped. They didn't necessarily go into that stark of a detail, but they tried to say, well, contributions dropped. Thank you, caller, for that. And therein lies the problem. And I think all three things are true. Three things being, you have mismanagement of the fund. You have the number of contributors falling. The short-term fall to that extent is not demographics. Then on top of that, you do have down the line to consider demographically. You know, you see what's happening with other pension schemes around the world. That might not be what's happening right now, like immediately. That drop, fall, that's a short-term thing, that's something else. Loss of jobs. You put those three things together, and in the long run, the NIS situation might be untenable. In the short run, we have problems, and I hate to say this, but giving the government the correct blame might not prevent raising the retirement age to 65. We still might have to do it. I'm not too sure what else you could do to reinvent the pension schemes, as Sanfana said, but to be fair, I haven't looked into it that deep. We have a call on the line as well. Another caller, good morning.
Hello, morning.
Morning, morning.
Right, I just have a short contribution to make
Sure.
on the same NIS thing. I remember earlier in my working life, I'm now retired, we used to have what we call field officers. And these persons would go around like every 2 months to various establishments to make sure that your NIS up to date and who doesn't know to guide them and report. And I keep saying that the monies that we're not having is outside. If we should have those field officers go out and do their work, because a short field officer is still at the establishment, monies would come in. You'd have a lot of companies out there. Every month they're deducting money from the employees, and they are not submitting it. So until we get serious with some of these things in the country, we would be better off. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. So caller from Tobago, that's a fourth reason now. So there's mismanagement, right, which just in general, of the fund, just in general. It'll affect the other reasons. Then there is the fact that the amount of the economic turmoil leading up to COVID, and COVID probably did not help, caused a reduction in contributors. That's a theory, right? Maybe somebody could have definite proof that the reduction in contributions happened for a different reason, but I'm going with that for now. Then there's the fact that we have to be concerned with the whole dilemma of an aging population with regards to pensions, national pension schemes in the long run. Then there's the fact that fraud and corruption, or in this case, businesses who are committing fraud, right? How widespread it is, we don't know. And the caller from Tobago alluded to, well, not alluded, she basically said field officers, she thinks they're still there, but they're not in the field. At least that's what I believe she said, right? And to some extent, yeah, you should have people whose job it is to go to locations and make inquiries, to ensure compliance. You know, but it seems as though in TNT, a government job is a sit pretty, do nothing job, right? I could to some extent live with less than optimal efficiency in public administration, you know, and you know it's going to take long because they have so many hoops to jump through and people to sign off. I can understand some of these things, right? Because running a country is complex. But when part of the problem is people not actually doing the job in various ways, right? And the problem is you hear about it from various institutions and corners of the government. Whether it is Coast Guard not patrolling, whether it is people working for the THA in theory only. You know, they're home, they're not working from home, they're just home, right? I have heard of one instance where, you know, somebody would get a call of when to show up for a meeting. Other than that, he doesn't go into the office, he has a job. He has to show up for meetings. I don't even know how he knows what to say at these meetings, or if he's just there. But he gets a salary. And I think one of our previous calls, Mr. Sanfanaro, he made a suggestion, you know, get some of the people that's working for the teachers, 67%. Well, somebody in Tobago told me 80%, you know, and I could easily believe either figure. The problem is not all of that 67% of the local Tobagonian population actually is doing anything productive. And I have heard this from people in Tobago. So this ain't something Sat said. I've heard this from people in Tobago, Tobagonians. There's a reason why a lot of the workers in certain jobs are from older generations, and they just get older and older and older, and there's not a lot of young people looking to take up those jobs, except Tobagonians will complain when migrants, whether they're from Guyana, Jamaica, Africa, Venezuela, Colombia, do those jobs. They'll complain, all of a sudden they'll complain. Do they want the jobs? No. In some cases, no. And that's not unique to Tobago. This ain't no Tobago only phenomenon. That is here. That is across the board. So, and I do wonder, I mean, how can a company pay VAT and be registered to pay VAT and not pay NIS? We live in a society where you're illegally squatting, but you could get a hookup with public utilities, TNTech and WASA, and then use those bills as proof of address to your illegal squatting, to a phone company or to a bank. Now, on some level, this proof of address is legally saying, I live here. I have a claim on it, and at some point, the system does not put two and two together and say, hey, that might be state land. That might be pipeline. They might have NGC pipes running under this land, and it's not safe, and they shouldn't be building over this land. The system is, the left hand don't know what the right hand doing, don't know what the left foot doing, don't know what the right foot doing. Everybody just out for themselves. And we get what we get with NIS. NIS is one problem. But a lot of these problems that you pointed out, viewers, it's across the board. It's across the board. Fraud, corruption. Oh, well, somebody just mentioned that with regards to education. With regards to, you know, doing some emergency contracts at the last minute so you don't have to go through the tendering process for your friends and family. A caller just mentioned that at the top of the segment. What about mismanagement? Oh, well, education has that. Workers not working. One could argue there are some teachers who work very hard in public schools, and there are other teachers who don't give two craps. You can say the same thing about national security. You can say the same thing about a lot of things. So, I'm over time. We're going to have to end the show there. I will end the show with this. Despite all that I have just said, I want to again give a shout out to the public servants who actually put in the work and keep the country running. Without you, we literally fall apart, right? So whoever you are, teachers, police officers, administrators, bureaucrats, those few PSs who are just there to do their job and not worry about their grand careers, like some other officials in high office who can't speak, and I don't know then why they want to have such a high office when they can't even speak to the public in any competent fashion. We ain't naming names, but if you watch the show, you might figure out who I'm talking about. I want to thank all of you. You are the ones that help make today a good day, and we could all have a great day if we try, as my co-host always says. But we will see you tomorrow morning. Bye-bye.
WESN.
I'm Andy Johnson, and you're watching WESN, the content capital.
Is it politics? What is it? Is it that nobody cares about